Yeah, he was very good. He's invited back anytime. The guy was dabbing. I can feel as the hour gets late. I always feel the restlessness.
Yeah.
So
Here it is.
schedules and move on.
No, I have
I'm
it.
sorry. Yeah, I should change
Okay.
my system schedule. So I actually went to that before that. Fine. All right.
I cut that out about 30 years ago.
We got that on. We got that
Cut
on.
out eggs.
All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. Today is Daf Mem Zayin Maseches Baba Kama. So we started the fifth parak yesterday.
Amad Aleph. Okay.
Amad Aleph. This we got the chicken. Fine. But Amad Rabba, probably around almost a third of the way down. Yeah, I'd say a third of the way down. Mem Zayin Amad Aleph, and away we go. Amad Rabba ain't shamin the par. So we were discussing. We had the Mishnah talking about an animal that gores, let's say, a pregnant cow. And so we were discussing in terms of the responsibility towards the fetus and towards, whether it was born before or after, right. So ain shaman. So that which we said in terms of evaluating the damages, ain shaman the power of vlad. We don't go ahead and evaluate the cow on its own and the fetus on its own, because that would maximize the payment upon the mazik. Ela shamin levlad al gav para. Right? No, it's rather we go ahead and we evaluate the two of them together. In other words, you might have, let's say, the mother cow is worth 200. Let's say a small cow is worth 125. Right, but a pregnant cow, you'd say, okay, is worth 250, right? So it's not worth a full 325. So therefore, because over there, I'm sorry. Yeah, because right. And how will the mother go ahead and survive and so on and so forth? But it turns out, because otherwise, if you machish the masik, you'd be causing too much. It would be too difficult upon the damager. So the Gemara says, so if that's the case, so even though that's a little bit different mathematical issue, so it's the same underlying concept that we don't want to maximize the payment that's placed upon the mazik. So therefore, right, one who goes ahead and cuts off the arm of an Eved. So let's just say an Eved's worth $1,000, and I go to the master and say, hey, how much is if I cut off your Eved's arm? We'll say $800, or $900, right? But the difference between, let's say, an Eved who has a hand is, let's say he's worth $1,000, an Eved without a hand is, let's say, worth $500. So then that's $500 is the loss. So therefore you go according to that, which would be the lower amount. And so too, in the case of one who damages someone's field, right? The field. If you look at a field and you look at a pile of fruit, or it eats the fruit, let's say. So the pile of fruit is worth a certain amount of money. But when you have fruit that is still attached and still upon the field, that's worth a little bit less. You have to harvest it, you have to gather it, so on and so forth. Therefore, you pay the lower amount. So only Rav Lavashi, I understand. I understand if that's the halacha, then okay, let him pay the higher amount. So your answer is no. Mishum derelei para marata as kasika para marata shamin alocha. He says no. I damage a pregnant cow for you, therefore I'm going to pay the loss of a pregnant cow. I'm not going to go ahead and start paying for a separate fetus because it gored a pregnant cow, and therefore I just want to know in terms of the value of what a pregnant cow is versus a cow that's not pregnant, and therefore I'll go ahead and that would be the difference. And paradachat, if the parazom I want to vlad dechat, so pitma the bal par. So now remember, we have you gore a cow. So let's say the one person owns a cow, the other person owns a fetus, and they both die as a result from the goring. Right? It was they were together at the time of the goring, both died. Now, so what about the increased value of a larger cow? Right? It's pregnant, it's larger, there's more meat on it. So, right, it does have, it's not just, the weight of a pregnant cow is not just, its weight before plus baby weight. There's other, they grow besides that. So obviously the pitma goes to the Baal Parah. So the fattening that the mother cow was, the extra fatness, so that would get paid to the balapara. So now but what about the girth, the thickness, the size around? So who gets that extra value? Cow is really big, is more hide. So who will get that? So Papa on the balapara. You divide it because the fetus really caused the cow to grow in terms of circumference around it, and the halach is that both the balapara and the bal the bal of the uber, those go ahead and split that payment.
More weight and more volume.
Right. So the weight definitely goes to the balapara in terms of the value. Who gets that? So that is chokin according to the Hilchasa.
Oh man! Wow.
All right. Now Mishnah. Mishnah says, "Hakodar shehichlis k'dei roisav lechatzer balabayis shelo b'shus." You have a person who is a potter, a guy who has pots. He puts his pots into the chutzner of his friend. So I go ahead and I put my pots in Randy's yard without permission. And then Randy's animals damage my pots. Potter. Randy is potter. But if my pots cause damage to Randy's dog, right? Then I'm chayiv to go ahead and pay because I did not put it there with rishus. But if I do bring it there with permission, he says, okay, you can put it in. Bal hachatzer chayiv. That if you go ahead and my pots are broken, then Randy has to go ahead and pay for it. That's case A. All right, similar case. Case B. Hichnis peros of the chatzer balabai is if I go ahead and instead of putting my fruits and I put my fruit. I think instead of my fruits, right? Instead of my pots in Randy's yard, I put in my fruits. The chatzer balabai shel b'shus without permission. The achalta behemta shel balabai behemta, right? Shel balabayis. And then Randy's animals go ahead and eat my fruit in his yard, which I put there without permission. Then Randy is potter. And if my animals go ahead and if my fruit go ahead and cause animals to him, then I am chayiv. That I'm chayiv to pay for the damage that was done to Randy's animal. But if I brought the permission, then Randy would be chayiv. Right. Right. And I was actually anticipating, the tzricha was be the first word of the Gemara saying, why do you need all three cases? Oh, we'll have a third. Now, but we'll see each one sort of adds something a little different. So, if one goes ahead and enters my animal, I put hey, can I bring my ox into a yard? I do not ask Randy. Once again, I bring my ox into Randy's yard without his permission. Oh, here's a real case, right? Or either your ox goes ahead and damages my animal, or your dog goes ahead and bites my animal. Then putter. Then you are putter from such a case because once again you never gave me permission. Now so my animal goes ahead and gores your animal, then I am chayiv. And if my animal is
that's even because the animal was there without rishus?
Without rishus. Right, without rishus. Now, nafal labora, if my animal goes into Randy's yard and falls into a pit, or a vivish memav, and let's say it ruins your water, then I'm chayiv. Or if it was in the pit, or let's say there was somebody in the pit and it kills that person, the shalom is a kofar, then you go ahead and you pay kofar. In other words, I would have to pay a kofar payment because my animal fell in. We'll soon have to see that case. Why? It's a tam. This could be the case we saw earlier, where there was a hint where we said he was muat to fall in the pit, but we'll get there. Even if it's b'shus, however, the im hichin is b'shus. But if Randy says you can go ahead and bring your animal, and then it falls in the pit, so bal chatzer chayiv, then Randy would be chayiv in such a case. No, not the kofar payment, but we'll actually soon see also in the Gemara see what he's chayiv for.
Like kofar is only paid if the human did.
Right, that was the case. He says the previous is haya aviv o beno l'seicha. If someone else was in that pit, and the animal fell into the pit, and they crushed it to death, then there would be a kofar payment. Assuming you'll be a muad, we have to explain what the case is. However, Rebbe has a different shita than all the three cases we've seen. What he says, in other words, when Randy gives me permission, it doesn't mean that now Randy is responsible for my pots, and therefore if I go ahead and Randy says you can put your pots in my yard or put your food in there, Randy is not guaranteeing that his animals will not cause any damage. You're just saying you can go ahead and put it there at your own risk. He was not makabel upon himself to guard them. If he's makabel to guard them, then he would be chayv. But unless he says, "Hey, okay, I'll watch it," he doesn't necessarily go ahead. He just says, "Okay, you can leave it there," but I'm not responsible, right? You can do what you want. But I'm sorry.
I thought you were going to do
it. Exactly. Unless he has a specific kabbalah to be for the shmir. So now let's analyze the first case. So let's say the case of the pot. If I brought there without rishus, mashma, if I did bring the pot to rishus, the bal chatzer, right? In other words, if I brought my, let's say I brought them there, and then Randy's animals were damaged from my pots. So I would not. So it says over there only because it was done without rishus, but if it was done with permission, then I would not be chayiv to go ahead and pay for any damage caused to Randy's animals. The law, Marina, we don't say ketule kabel bal kaderos nitirusa the bal chatzer, and we do not say right that him allowing him to go ahead and by putting it in there says that I'm accepting right responsibility for the animals inside there, right? I don't say that, right? So therefore, money. Whose opinion is this? This is Rebbe the Amar called the stomach like you 11 tirosa. Anytime there's just permission doesn't mean I'm accepting those. By me putting it there, I'm not accepting to watch your animals, right? And therefore, I would be putter if something happens in that case. So Gemara says, "Well, aim is safer. Let's look at safer. Im hichnes rishus said earlier fair. If he brought it with permission, bal chatzer chayiv. Then bal chatzer chayiv. So aslan rabbanon damri b'stama nami kibul kibul dirusa. In this case, if Randy says, "Hey, go ahead," right? That means, "Hey, go ahead," means according to the rabbanon, means that if when he says, "Go ahead," and then his animals cause damage to my item, right? Randy's chayiv. So, "Hey, go ahead" means he's mikabel upon the liability. In the previous case, when he said "go ahead," we said if my pots go ahead and cause damage to Randy's animals, I'm putter, because we don't say "hey, go ahead" means I'm also okay. Since I'm putting there, I'm going to watch your animals. We don't say that. So Gemara says v'su, and okay. So the Reisha seemed to be the Rebbe, the Seifo is the Rabbanan, v'su, and then if you look at the end part of the Mishnah, notice that after the third case, v'su Rabbi Yavi b'kulan and Eichel Ashik Abalav Balabais Lishmor. Then the third part is definitely Rebbe. So Reisha v'Seifo Rebbe. So the Reisha, the first part of the first case is and the last part is Rebbe. Matziyasa Rabbanan, and the middle is Rabbanan. Some of Zera says Rab Zera. So Dabra, yeah, don't go ahead and try and break your head. Misha Shanazu, Lo Shanazu. Yeah, okay, they're different. However, Rav Amar, no, Kula Rabbanan. Ruling it's all the Rabbanan. Uveshu Shmiras Kederas Kibela Balachatzer V'Afilu Nishba Buruach. So basically, in essence, when the person asks rishus, right, it's only going one way. When Randy says that, when Randy says you're out, you can go ahead and put your stuff in there. It means Randy is accepting upon himself responsibility for any and all things that happen to my stuff. Now, it doesn't say anything whether me putting it in there also means I'm mekabel any to make sure that none of my stuff damaged Randy's stuff. That's not on me. I was never makabel that. I just put my stuff there and entrusted Randy, but I didn't go ahead and not makabel. So therefore, you can't make that diuk according to the Rabbanan. So don't make that diuk in the case of the Reisha. In other words, even if Randy gives me permission and my stuff now causes damage to Randy's stuff, I would indeed still be putter. So 2 dots, last skinny line. If one goes ahead and he brings the fruits in, all right. So that was the second case. He brings the fruits in. So Amirav lo shanu ella shehuchlu tabahen. We're only talking about it. So now, so the first case was
the previous thing.
Yeah.
The Mishnah says that if you're killing damage my animals, then I'm chayav.
1 second.
Then
Whose yard is whose?
the Bala Kaderos is chayav.
If what? If I put it without rishus.
Yes.
The question is when rishus is. We were trying to make a deal. When rishus is given, what type of liability is there? Just because the permission doesn't necessarily mean that, okay, since I'm putting there with permission, I will make sure that my pots don't damage your animal. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean, according to the Rabbanan, that once you give me permission to put my pots in your yard, you are accepting liability for my pots. That's the Rabbanan. But it's not, it doesn't go both ways. It's an unfair relationship, right? By you doing me a favor, you're a very nice guy, and you're accepting a responsibility for liability from your animals onto my object. But I'm not a nice guy. Not only am I, putting my stuff in your yard for free, I'm not accepting any liability towards your possessions in your yard. And so now in the case of the fruits, we're talking about, okay, so we said the animals go ahead, he put in there without permission, then, and they eat it. Then he's what's it called? Then they eat it. Then the owner, then the owner of the yard is potter because he never gave permission. But if my animals, if the fruits go ahead and damage the animals, right? Then I would be chai. So lo shana el shehu when my stuff caused damage is because you slipped on it. But if they ate it, and let's say they ate it, that it was something that was not good for them, potter. Then I am patur because your animals, right? Let's say Randy left, but okay, I will still use Randy, right? So he says, if I put my chocolate in Randy's yard and his dog eats my chocolate, okay, so I'm patur according to this. Only if he slips on the chocolate, but if he eats it, I'm patur. Why is that? My time. You shouldn't have eaten it, right? I didn't tell him to eat it, right? So therefore, he ate it. And Rav Sheshes, Rav Sheshes says, it must be Kinam Shachiv Rav. He must have been sleeping when he said this. Because we have something beferish now. The Tanya in the Bryce says, if I go ahead and I put out poison in front of my neighbor's barking dog, it barks there all night. So, okay, I got an idea. I'm going to put some poison out. Pater b'di Adam, he's pater b'di Adam, chayv b'dinei Shemai. But chayv b'dinei Shemai. So it's dafka, but there's some amavas, it's only something which is poison who the love you to offer. Because poison is not normally eaten. Aval peiros, but let's say it was fruits, right? And it would have died from fruits, right? Or overeaten, whatever it was. If I would have put fruits out there in front of it, the animal eats the fruits and it dies, right? I would be chayiv with the other. Why would it be chayiv? Why don't you have the same argument? You just said, hey, who I didn't tell the animal to eat. So that was the response in the case of the chocolate in Randy's yard. I didn't tell his dog to eat the chocolate, so I'm not responsible. So over here, if I put out food and it kills the animal, I shouldn't be responsible. Why am I chayiv with the other? So they say, who did that? Feel peiros nami pater. Okay, fine. Not only if you put out poison, you're pater b'di Adam, you can't be tried, for murder, for killing a person's dog, right, or his animals. Right, but now also feel peiros not be part of the other. Even if I put out fruit and it dies, it part of the other. Why? Even poison nami. Maybe you can say that poison it shouldn't be pater at all. The animal shouldn't have eaten the poison. So chayiv b'dinei shemayim. Nevertheless, you're chayiv b'dinei shemayim. Right? I put it out for the rats. Right? I put it out for the city rats. I didn't put it out for his dog to eat. I didn't know the dog eat. Dogs don't eat it, but if the dog does eat it. Maybe you say I'm completely pater, so Kamash Malon, I'm chayiv b'dinei Shemai. Or Viboy, same. Samamavas, even poison, nami. It's not talking about a case of fruits, bafrasa, the hind or pere. Certain type of poisonous, crab apple or something, whatever it is, right? The poisonous fruit that the animal ate. So therefore, that's what's really talking about fruit. And in such a case, it says chayiv b'dinei Shemai, and pater b'dinei Adam. Fine. 2 dots. Meisvei ha'isha shenichnas litchayin chitim eitzel balabai shalabashus. A woman says, I'm going to just use that person's yard. Does not ask for any permission to go ahead and grind wheat. And now while she's in the yard, v'achaltan behemto shel balabais. Right, I go into Mark's yard. Right, and I start, and then some of his without permission, some of his animals starts to eat my wheat. So Putter, Mark is Putter for paying me because I was not supposed to be there, right? His animals, right? However, Imhuska Chayevus, if my wheat causes damage, right, to your animals by eating it, right? It wasn't good for their diet, they're on a special diet, then I'm Chayev, right? The woman in this case, or which would be Chayev. The Gemara says, why would that be? Well, what about your whole svara? I didn't tell the animals to eat, so they shouldn't have eaten it. That's on you, Mark, right? Your animals shouldn't have eaten my wheat. Yes, and economy that I had no permission to be there, but I didn't tell them to eat it, right? You know what I'm saying? So obviously they say, I understand. You're asking me a kasha from this brisa. I just asked you the identical kasha from a Mishnah, right? Or we brought another case of the Mishnah. And what was the case of there? We talked about the case of the fruits over there. This is the case of wheat. And we said in the case of the fruit, we're talking about when the animal slips on them, but when the animal eats them, he's putter. So we'll say, who go back? So the Gemara says, okay, good point. The Kari law, my Kari. Okay, so he asked the question, why did he ask? If we gave the same teretz to the Mishnah, so we'll get the same teretz to the Brisa. Why would you think any different? You say, right? It was the extra word bahed. If it damaged them, so bahed sounds like shulcha bahed, that they slipped on it. But over here in this case, Katani imhuska. It only says imhuska, beloy Katani bahen. It doesn't say bahen. So therefore, imhuska meaning achila. That's achila the Katani. Therefore, it's referring to achila. So therefore, that's why it asks the idach, and they want to get a teretz. I'm the doesn't make a difference whether it says imhuska bahan or just imhuska. Either way, it means if the animal slips on it, but not necessarily eats it. But if it eats it, then the person will be putter from causing damage to the animal because he could say, "Hey, I didn't tell your animal to go ahead and eat it." So Tashma, come and listen. If a person goes ahead and brings the shore into the chatz of the balabais without permission, the alchal chitin. So I go ahead and bring my ox into your chutzner without any permission. The alchal chitin, right? And then your animal eats my wheat. The heat trees, and then all of a sudden gets a stomach ache, right? His bowels loosen, umace, and the animal dies from eating my stuff. Putter. Then he is pater. But if he says, okay, you can bring the animal in, then balachatzer, we say in this case, then balachatzer is chayv. So Gemara says, if for eating the wheat. The Gemara says, why should we chayv in the case before? Why don't we say, hey, your animal shouldn't eat the wheat in order to destroy its stomach and die? Samarava, your shoes, ashalov shoes, karabis, right? You're asking a case of when you one for permission versus without permission, right? Bershus, when he says for permission, shmiras shora kibi alav. When one goes ahead and reshus, he's basically being makabel himself all types of shmira, right? And even if it goes ahead and it chokes itself, in other words, in that case, when he allows him to go ahead and bring it in, so then he's makabel for all types of shmira. And but if there's shalom reshus, then obviously, then he would be chayv in such a case. There would be no accepting of any towards of liability. And Iboilu, speaking of accepting liability, heicha the kibel aleh niterasa, where he accepts liability. Right. So if I go ahead and say, Mark, can I bring this in your yard? You say, sure, no problem, and I'll make sure nothing happens to it. Right. So Mao the nafshe the kibel aleh is Mark only guaranteeing, right, that there is no damage to it from his property, from his animals. Or maybe anything happens to it, right? Something falls from the sky, or we'll soon see another case. So Tashbar, come listen. The Tani, Rav Yehuda bar Simon ben Ezekiel, he says over there, Ezekiel in the Beikarna, he says over there in the Beikarna. So Yichnis Peroisa, B'chatzir Balabais, Shalobashus. The person goes out and brings his fruits. Right. I go ahead and place my fruits in Mark's house without permission. Uba Shor Miwakamacher, and then Eddie's ox goes ahead and goes into right now. Eddie's ox goes into Mark's yard and eats my fruits there that I put there, shalom bershus, without permission. Right. So my fruits are in Mark's yard without permission, and all of a sudden Eddie's animals come along without permission from Mark, and they jump into Mark's yard, right, and then eat the fruits. Putter. All right. So who's Putter? The Gemara is soon going to ask that. So he says, Vachlan Putter. Vim hichnis b'rishus, and if he goes ahead and brings in there rishus, right? So then he, in other words, that I brought the food in there with rishus, then chayiv, Now, so man pater man chayiv. So who's chayiv? Who's pater? So la pater bal chatzir. Don't we mean the bal chatzir is pater? Knows if I go ahead and I put it out without Mark's permission and it gets eaten by Eddie's animals, Mark is pater. If I put it in there with Mark's permission and Eddie's animals eat it, then chayiv. Right? And therefore, this answers our question that when Mark says he's accepting liability, it's not a liability of his stuff, but anything in the world. So you see in this case. So, right, is that not what the case is saying? Simon says, no. What does it mean? Putter means if I go ahead and I put my fruits in Mark's yard and Eddie's animals come along and I did it without permission, then putter balashor. Eddie is putter from his animals eating my fruit in Mark's yard. The chayiv. And when we say chayiv, it's balashor. If Mark says you have permission, and then Eddie's animals come into Mark's yard to eat it, then Eddie is chayiv. I understand. Balashor, but I understand we're talking about the balashor. My rishus, my shalom. What does it mean? Rishus, shalom. What does it make a difference whether I put in Mark's yard permission or not permission? Why should it make a difference to Eddie? So he got me. They said no. Rishus havile shein rishus hanizak. Once Mark gives me permission to leave my fruits there, it's like it's my property, and therefore we know that halach is if Eddie's animals jump into my property and they eat my stuff, then Eddie's chayiv. So therefore, since Mark gives me permission, it becomes like the location of the nizak, and therefore, havile shem b'shus nizak. The shem b'shus nizak is chayeves. But if Mark never gave you permission, havile shem b'shus rabim, then it's like in a public way. The shem b'shus rabim is patura, and therefore shem b'shus rabim is patur, and therefore that's the reason why Eddie's exempt, because Mark's yard is like the rishus rabim. Because apparently everyone's using Mark's yard, right? Because I put my fruits there without permission, and these animals went in there without permission. And Rishus Rabim, Rishus Rabim is patur. All right, we'll stop here. Shkayach, everybody. Everyone have a wonderful day. Stay warm and.